it could sound like a political speech.
It is.
That somehow, and it is in some way.
But if I get to the point,
but these things here, we're talking about evaluating well-being, and we will later talk about the measurement of culture. How do we measure the advantages of culture? It's not the number of bums in seats, or tickets sold, or visitors statistics at the museum. That's not where the measuring will be done. But these things, if you don't feel good about your life because you don't have trust, you're alone, you don't feel you're a part of a community, you don't feel healthy, and you don't know who to help you in the extended families. For example, we live in an extreme nuclear family society. In the extended families, it was the grandkids that took care of the grandparents. And the mother went to work while the grandmother, I don't say that this is nostalgia, that we want to go back to that, but there was a feeling of security. Unemployment is a cultural question. It is not that if everybody had jobs that they didn't like and that they weren't motivated to do, people would not be happier. Unemployment is the feeling of not being useful to anybody.
But that's the point. It's the unemployment. It's not just the fact that you don't build revenues. It's that you don't have, I was saying before, a social role. If you're not part of the society, which is even major than having the means of living. Because we have a society that recognizes us either our consumer or our producer. Not as someone which is beneficial to someone else. That's, you have a growing participation in solidarity mechanism in town by aging people and by young people, because it's a way to regaining a social role. And what a policy would work on these things, not just by thinking that you have to employ people in a classical way, but you're going to need to make people, feeling part of the society, being active. Is that if we want to build a society which is based on well-being, we need to invest, and Chris was saying before, I call it social capital here, okay? And when Chris made the point of the education system, when Chris made the point of what the education system have been oriented into the last 20 years, to build competencies, and the competencies were competition competencies, instead of cooperations. You have been a social capital which is valuable for business in a competitive way, but you didn't build any capital which is socially useful to generate innovation. If we need to shift our society towards a different balance, we need to understand that a different social capital is required, and this social capital is composed by cultural capacities, which are those. True is that the life we live generate impact on the accumulation of social capital. And if the life we live, if the life we live has to enable us to generate that kind of social capital that we need to get out of the transition, then what's the role of the cultural activity in the society? What's the magnitude of the impact of the activity that you do in a much broader endeavor, which is not just doing that, but is generating the condition for this part of the world to build a social contract which is different. That's not detrimental at all to the freedom of expression or to the artistic genius, but it's to understand that what the experience that people do, the notion of participation, which was so strong in Chris' message, it's so profound because it's through that mechanism, through that circle that you build that things. And if you don't bring that things in the education experiences, even in the way you conceive physical spaces, you will never enable this part of the world to generate the capacities, which are culture capacities, that enable us to shift that directions.
So the conclusion from that slide is that running a dynamic, active, engaged public library in Lilla Edet is much more important than bringing one factory with 100 jobs. Because those 100 jobs in 10 years will go away anyway. Somebody will make money, use the people, spit them out. But the public library is building up social capital, which gives us a capacity not only to live and feel better about ourselves, but also to develop our own jobs and the kind of things that our neighbors need.
It also implies that you need to understand what's the library perform in relation to these things. So that what you measure in the library, and it's the value of the experience that people do when they go in the library. And if you think, which many economists tend to say today, I don't like economists, but even I have a background, is that, you know, the past generation has spent its life to looking for a job. The new generation has to spend a life to invent a job. It's exactly not the situation we have mostly experiences. Then trying to measure what kind of skills you need to invent a job, where the competition, it does not work anymore on the quantity, because we don't have the quantity in this part of the world. And we don't have the exclusivity of the scientific knowledge nor the technology. What we can have in this part of the world as a main asset is the quality of life, because we are far more advanced than the rest of the world. So there is this is an implication for the cultural policy, by example. From cultural policy, intended or meant as the set of measure that you put in place to support or enable a sector to evolve. So defining a sector as a set of activity, to policy for cultural development. So try to understanding, that's the impact assessment, how a set of policies, which is much larger than this one, but let's start from this one, their impact in generating that kind of capacity which are necessary for social capital. And then the impact assessment in when you decide to buy a bus, not just the way you put the line, but the quality of the experience that you do when you take a public transport. It's relevant because it tells you how you are a citizen and what kind of relationship you establish in that space. So having, by example, it's a stupid example, I know, and criticized for that. But by having, if you go in the underground and you find people playing music in the underground, that normally reshape the experience that you're having there, both for empathy or for solidarity or for the pleasure what they do. But it's not just merely going from here to there, but living a moment in which your common sphere is enlarged. And if you start to assessing how a public transport works, not just in terms of moving people from a place to another one, but the quality of the experience that people do that. And even what is the value of the time that people spend in their mobility, instead of just moving, but going from a place to another one, then it's not the mobility, it's a trip, and a trip a different meaning. Then you can understand what cultural impact assessment might mean if you apply it largely to different set of policies. Try to imagine what architecture means. And the architect, they normally do these kind of things. But even the relationship that you have with science activity in your own town, the science community are normally communities which are closed inside. And could be the cultural impact of a policy which push the scientific community to part of the ordinary civic life. Not only in terms of knowledge acquired, but the relationship and the philosophical achievement that comes out from that one. And what theater you would need if the going to theater is just trying to maximize the set of that experiences. What kind of public spaces you need. So this is the first change. But there's another one, the new symbols that we need to take over the GDP. I'll skip that to remove it. But we need new constituencies. And I'm getting to the end, which is that this gets to us. There's been very much, for a long time, the idea, which I think it's unfortunate, is naive, then building good argumentation is enough to have a good decision making. It is not true, because decision making is like that. Decision making, political decision making, is about weighing the interests that are sitting at the table. And the argumentation is essential because it enables to build constituencies. So the meaning, the argumentation that you build has to target and reach larger public than the one they are already convinced, because they need to be advocate for something they do not perceive to be relevant. That's what the environmentalists did 30 years ago. It was something which was very niche, but they understood that unless they were building, you know, a public opinion, a constituency in support of their argumentation, they would have never been able to achieve any political decision making in support of that. We didn't do that. We need to do that now.
When you say constituencies, you mean a group of people?
It's a group of people, which is the one that supports.
In this case, we need audiences.
Audience, yes.
This is the citizen-visitor connection that I talked about before. You were speaking about our problem is that the people in Lille that don't seem to want to respond to the cultural offering that's being made. The problem is, or your challenge is to first go to them to find out what they need, provide them what they're asking for or what they don't know they need yet, but which they've implied, and then seeing that they are with you, and they will go with you, or even before you, to the politicians and say, more money for this. More money for this. But if you don't have that constituency, you're fighting with politicians and with economic interests that only think that you're talking in self-interest. The free group goes to Madeleine Kurstedt in Stockholm and says, we need more money. And Madeleine Kurstedt says, for what? You just are talking for yourself. And they say, no, but we have a bunch of people who really need us. And she says, really? I haven't seen them. They haven't been talking very loud. So that we need to go back and build this constituency, which is in the cultural sector is our audience.
But it's also the citizens, no?
And
the citizens. I mean, we need to make clear to ourselves first, but also to other people, that what we are talking is not just our living, but it's something which is essential for the society to progress. Because if the humankind has been able to, I don't like the word prevail, or survive in an unfriendly environment, it's just because it has the capacity to generate culture. That's the story. It's a biological, simple thing.
We will quote you.
But it's such, no? But we forgot that, and we build constituencies that were just ourselves. So we've been negotiating with the decision making on behalf of ourselves. Even because we are strongly convinced, sometimes too much, that what we do is relevant. It's that relevant.
Kan någon hjälpa mig med det där mittersta ordet? Översätt det till svenska.
Valkrets betyder det ju i snäv bemärkelse.
Vad sa du?
Valkrets.
Sorry.
De för vem vi jobbar, men som, det vill säga vem riktar vi oss till? Our constituency is, för en kulturinstitution så är en constituency vår publik. Det är de som måste ge oss inte bara biljettpris, pengar, men också deras intresse och deras stöd. Annars vad vi gör hänger i luften som en tom gest.
Sorry.
Ja, det det är nästa frågan. Det är den praktiskt som vi ska in med.
Just imagine that.
Förankring.
Oops.
Ja, förankring. Det är precis det här om förankring. Vi har pratat om det i åratal. Det är bara vi har glömt bort.
I mean, you wouldn't care. No, I mean, you are our constituencies in support of the public education system, aren't you? And you are not teachers, or someone maybe is also teachers. That you need the very same problem. It's the very same problem. You need to have behind the demand of culture as an essential part of society, the society, and you start with the one that are closer to you, because the one that enjoy directly you. But then you have to go beyond and build alliances with other civil society sectors that they understand that there is an issue, because this element is becoming a more general understanding.
This is actually the example you just gave is an excellent one around education, because most of us probably here are parents and we're citizens. And if it was the teachers going to the politicians to try to convince the politicians that they need to invest in schools, the politicians would say, yeah, of course you want more money for your school, your teachers, you get paid better, you get better coffee rooms or whatever. But they know that the teachers don't have to do that work, because the parents, the society, the citizens, we have demanded, we made it clear, public education for all. That's a demand, and the constituency demands that. The politicians then respond. The teachers can be our allies in making a good school. But in the cultural sector, it's not that way. It's the cultural sector lobbying for itself. Our audiences are silent.
And that probably means that there is a problem. So there's a problem. And getting to the end, that's what I was saying. A problem is that these are currently, partially European Union policy. One of the problem in generating new decision making, and the discourse we are trying to do, is cross-departmental. So the structure of, the city, the regions, the decision making is fragmented. Not even in this way. No, this is the way that we are trying to recompose things, but it's fragmented. So one of the major challenges which we are trying to respond with a new way of thinking the network is how you can build coalitions that are able to impact in parallel and contemporary in different sectors of the decision making. Because when we use the notion of impact assessment the way Chris is using, then we have responsibility to analyzing what decisions are taken in spaces and thematic which are very far, not intuitively not related to the culture policy. That's what we are transforming, a lobby organization.
You want to go into
No. This is
Okay.
just it's going through that way.
It's about to aim us there.
Yeah, and these are final things that we need to start assess these kind of things in general. And we need to do this, revise the policies. Assuming that the generational social capital is a primary objective, and the generational social capital in that explanation implies things that have to do with all the generation of culture. Because
just to help you with the English, because these are some difficult words here. Assessment, this is utvärdering eller mätning of effekten. So basically, if you follow these three, which is very intelligently put up, if our building social capital is our primary objective, then we must decide that culture and cultural experience, in the broad meaning of the word, from schools to performances to participatory to singing in a choir to whatever, is a vehicle to build social capital. And then we have to have a way of measuring it to see if this is doing this well, that actually takes into account well-being and not just GNP.
And imagine that many, for example, the analysis and the thinking over these issues in the museum sector in UK or somewhere in Spain is very advanced. Because the people managing museums, they often find in the position of being contemporary the library and the performing space. So you find very interesting reflection on this. The UK National Association of Museum or the Caixa, the Cosmo Caixa in Spain or whatever. There's a lot of things done. So it's just it's not just thinking, it's happening. But it has to become, you know, a common endeavor of a community, a larger community. Because that I like that. And this is, I must confess, this is my eldest son when it was kids. Because I think that if we do that way, we can really help them to catch a better life. If we don't do that way, we will give them a very terrible inheritance. I'm profoundly convinced that. This is, I mean, it's not just our challenge. It's a common, and that's where you find Cultural Action Europe in the coming period.
Thanks.
That's a pretty long, I'm sorry.
We're going to take a short break just again to stretch. I think it's better to go in and out more often.